They left no written words of their own, no chronicles, no royal inscriptions, no names carved in stone that we can read. Everything we know about them comes from the earth they walked on, and from the words of their conquerors, before the Romans, before the name Switzerland, before anyone thought to draw borders on a map. There were the Helvetii. They were farmers, warriors, traders, and goldsmiths. They built fortified towns on hills and worshipped gods whose names we have forgotten. They minted coins, crossed the Alps, and faced the might of Rome itself. This is their story, the story of the people who gave this land its first name in history. To understand the Helvetii, we must first understand the Celts. They were not a single empire or nation, but a collection of tribes sharing similar languages, art, and beliefs, spread across Europe from the British Isles to Anatolia. By the 5th century BC, a distinctive Celtic culture had emerged in the heart of Europe. Archaeologists call it La Tène, named after a site on the shores of Lake Neuchâtel in Switzerland. And it was here, on the Swiss plateau, that one of the most powerful Celtic tribes made their home, the Helvetii. Their name itself tells a story, though like much about them, that story comes to us through others. One of the earliest known mentions of their name dates to around 300 BC, scratched onto a vase found in Mantua, Italy. The inscription, in Etruscan letters, reads Helvetii. It likely identified a man of Helvetian descent living far from his homeland. Linguists connect the name to Gaulish words meaning the people rich in land. This interpretation is widely accepted but not universally. Even then, the Helvetii were travelers, traders, and warriors who ranged far beyond their Alpine homeland. Much of what we know about them comes from Roman authors, particularly Julius Caesar, whose political motives shaped their narratives. We must read their accounts with care, but we cannot read them at all without the Helvetii themselves. To know the Helvetii, we must walk in their footsteps, and there is no better place to begin than here, the Uetliberg, overlooking the city of Zurich. Here, at 873 meters above sea level, the Helvetii built one of their most impressive strongholds, an oppidum or fortified settlement dating to the early La Tène period around 500 to 100 BC. The walls were up to 14 meters high and 35 meters thick, a testament to the engineering skill of these people. Inside, hundreds lived, worked, and worshipped. The oppidum was not just a fortress, it was the heart of a community. But by the 1st century BC, the Helvetii had moved down from the heights. On the Lindenhof hill, today the peaceful heart of Zurich, they built a new oppidum strategically positioned where the Limmat River flows out of Lake Zurich. In 1890, workers digging near the lakeshore made an astonishing discovery. Buried in the mud were massive lumps of fused Celtic coins, the largest weighing nearly 60 kilograms. Thousands of coins melted together in a single deliberate act. Scholars believe these were offerings, gifts to the gods, cast into the lake as an act of worship. The Helvetii did not just live on this land, they believed it was sacred. Not far from here, on the former island of Grosser Hafner, stood a sanctuary, a place where the Helvetii and later the Romans came to honor their gods. The Helvetii were not a single, unified tribe in the way we might think. They were a confederation, a union of smaller groups that the Romans called pagi. Roman sources mention 4 of these sub-tribes: the Tigurini, perhaps centered around Lake Neuchâtel, the Verbigeni, the Tugeni, and one whose name has been lost to history entirely. These names come primarily from Roman sources. Their exact territories and relationships are debated by archaeologists. Near modern Bern, on a peninsula formed by the Aar River, the Helvetii built another major oppidum. The site, which we now call Engehalbinsel, was occupied for centuries, first as a Celtic stronghold, later as a Roman settlement. Here, archaeologists have found evidence of 2 distinct oppida. one dating to 150 to 58 BC, and another built after the Helveti's encounter with Rome. They've uncovered workshops, bronze foundries, potters' quarters, and even a small amphitheater, and they found temples, small square structures of a distinctly Gaulish type, places where the Helvetii came to pray, to sacrifice, to seek the favor of gods whose names we will never know. How did the Helvetii govern themselves? The evidence, drawn largely from Roman sources, suggests a society of warriors and nobles led not by kings, but by a class of aristocrats. Julius Caesar, who would come to know the Helvetii all too well, describes their political system. They had no king. Instead, they were governed by their nobles and by annually elected magistrates. Caesar is our main source for Helvetian politics. Archaeological evidence provides limited independent confirmation. We know of one man who sought to change this. His name was Vercingetorix, a wealthy and ambitious nobleman who dreamed of making himself king. Our knowledge of him comes entirely from Caesar's account, written decades after the events. According to Caesar, Vercingetorix conspired with nobles from neighboring tribes. Each was to seize power in his own land, and together they would rule. But when word of his ambition reached the Helvetian nobles, they moved swiftly. Vercingetorix was summoned to stand trial. If found guilty, he faced execution by fire. He never faced judgment. According to Caesar, Vercingetorix died before the trial could take place, perhaps by his own hand, perhaps by other means. Scholars debate the details, as Caesar's account is our only source, but his ambition would set in motion events that would change the fate of his people forever. To understand what happened next, we must look beyond the borders of Helvetian territory. To the north, beyond the Rhine, forces were stirring that would reshape the entire Celtic world. In the late 2nd century BC, Germanic tribes, the Cimbri, the Teutones, the Ambrones, began to migrate south. They swept into Gaul, clashing with both Celts and Romans, and among those who joined their raids were two of the Helvetian Pagi, the Tigurini and the Tugeni. In 107 BC, the Tigurini, led by a chieftain named Divico, achieved something remarkable. They defeated a Roman army near Agen, killing the consul Lucius Cassius Longinus himself. According to Caesar, the captured Roman soldiers were forced to pass under a yoke, a humiliating ritual that the Romans would never forget. It was a stain on Roman honor that demanded vengeance. The Germanic invaders would eventually be crushed by the Roman general Gaius Marius in 102 and 101 BC. But the Tigurini, who had returned home with their plunder, escaped destruction. For a generation, there was peace. But the memory of Roman defeat and Roman humiliation would not fade. By 61 BC, pressure was building. Germanic tribes were pressing on the Rhine. The Helvetian homeland, rich though it was, could not hold all its people, and ambitious nobles saw opportunity. A decision was made, one that would echo through history. The Helvetii would leave their homeland, all of them. They would migrate to the west, to the lands of the Santonis near the Atlantic coast. For 2 years, they prepared. They sowed crops to gather food for the journey. They traded for wagons and draft animals. They made alliances with tribes along their intended route. And then, in the spring of 58 BC, they burned their homes. According to Caesar, they burned 12 oppida and 400 villages, all reduced to ash. There would be no turning back. According to Caesar's account, records found in their camp, written in Greek on wooden tablets, listed the migrating host at 368,000 people. Of these, 92,000 were warriors. These figures come from Caesar. Most modern historians consider them exaggerated, but the scale was clearly immense. These numbers come from Caesar's account. Modern historians almost universally consider them an exaggeration, perhaps by a factor of 2 or 3. But whatever the true count, this was a migration of staggering proportions, a whole people on the move, carrying everything they owned, seeking a new home. At the head of the Roman Republic's forces, in Gaul stood a man whose ambition matched the scale of the events unfolding, Gaius Julius Caesar. The Helveti's planned route would take them through the Roman province of Transalpine Gaul, past Geneva, where a vital bridge spanned the Rhone. Caesar moved swiftly. He ordered the bridge at Geneva destroyed. He raised troops from the province. And when the Helvetian envoys arrived, requesting permission to pass, he gave them an answer they had not expected. He refused. Blocked at Geneva, the Helvetii were forced to take a longer, more difficult route through the Jura Mountains and the lands of the Sequani. But Caesar did not stop at denying them passage. He gathered 6 legions, some 30,000 men, and set off in pursuit. In June of 58 BC, Caesar caught up with the Helvetii as they crossed the Sonne River. 3/4 of their force had already crossed, but the Tigurini, that same Pagus that had humiliated Rome 50 years before, remained on the eastern bank. Caesar struck without warning. His legions massacred those who had not yet crossed. For Rome, it was sweet revenge. For the Helvetii, it was a devastating blow. In just one day, Caesar's engineers threw a bridge across the Saône. His entire army crossed, a feat that had taken the Helvetii 20 days. The Helvetii sent envoys to negotiate. Their leader was Divico, the same chieftain who had defeated the Romans 50 years before. He was an old man now, but his pride remained. If the Romans want peace, he said, they will have it. But if they want war, they will find that the Helvetii remember how to fight. Caesar demanded hostages and reparations. Divico refused. The war would continue. For 2 weeks, the Romans followed the Helvetii, shadowing their march. Caesar's supplies were running low. He needed to reach the allied town of Bibracte, the capital of the Aedui, to resupply. When the Helvetii saw the Romans heading toward Bibracte, they made a fateful decision. They believed the Romans were retreating. They turned and attacked. Caesar was ready. He deployed his 4 veteran legions in the standard Roman formation at the foot of a hill. His 2 newer legions and auxiliaries were stationed above, guarding the baggage. The Helvetii advanced. They drove back Caesar's cavalry and pressed toward the Roman line. At the critical moment, Caesar gave the order. The legionaries hurled their pila, heavy javelins designed to pierce shields and armor. Many Helvetii, their shields pinned or useless, threw them aside. And then the Romans drew their swords and charged. The Helvetii were driven back. But as the Romans pursued, they were struck in the flank by 15,000 warriors, the Boii and Tulingi, allies who had been guarding the Helvetian rear. Now the Romans faced enemies on 2 sides. It was the most desperate moment of the battle. But Caesar kept his head. He ordered his 3rd line to turn and face the Boii and Tulingi, while the first 2 lines continued their assault on the Helvetian main force. The fighting lasted into the night. Finally, the Helvetian camp was taken. The survivors fled into the darkness. In the captured Helvetian camp, Caesar reports the Romans found something remarkable. Census records the Helvetii had carried with them, written in Greek. They listed every man, woman, and child who had left their homeland. These casualty figures come from Caesar. Many historians consider them exaggerated for political purposes. The exact numbers may never be known. According to Caesar, of the 368,000 who had set out, only 110,000 returned to the Swiss plateau. Scholars debate these numbers. They come from Caesar himself, who had every reason to exaggerate his victory. But whether the numbers are exact or not, the scale of the disaster was clear. The Helvetii had been broken. Caesar ordered the survivors to return to their homeland. He did not want the land left empty, an invitation for Germanic tribes to cross the Rhine. The Helvetii returned to find their homes in ashes, their fields overgrown. They rebuilt, but nothing would be the same again. Under Augustus, their territory was incorporated into the Roman province of Gallia Belgica, later Germania Superior. A new capital arose at Aventicum, modern Avenches. It became a Roman colony, complete with temples, an amphitheater, and all the trappings of Roman civilization. The Helvetian nobles became Roman citizens. Their children learned Latin. Their gods were merged with Roman ones. The Helvetii did not disappear overnight. For generations, they maintained their identity, but gradually, they were absorbed into the great Roman world. In the later 3rd century, Roman control over the region weakened. Germanic tribes, the Alemanni, began to cross the Rhine, raiding and settling. The Roman frontier collapsed. By the 5th and 6th centuries, the Swiss plateau was home to new peoples, Alemanni in the north and east, Burgundians in the west. The Helvetii were gradually assimilated, their language lost, their identity fading into the mists of time. Today, the name of the Helvetii lives on. Confederatio Helvetica, the Helvetic Confederation, is the official name of Switzerland. The letters CH on Swiss cars and internet domains stand for Confederatio Helvetica. But who were they, really? We have their artifacts, their beautiful gold work, their coins, the remains of their oppida. We have the words of their conqueror, describing their courage and their pride. We do not have their own words. We do not know what songs they sang, what stories they told their children, what prayers they whispered to their gods. We have only the things they left behind, and the knowledge that they were here. They were not the first people of this land. Before them came Neolithic farmers, Bronze Age lake dwellers, and hunters who roamed these valleys 150,000 years ago. But the Helvetii were the first whose name we know. They faced the greatest power of the ancient world, and though they lost, they were not destroyed. They endured, adapted, and eventually became part of something new. Their lost civilization is not so much lost as transformed. Its echoes still heard in the name of this land, in the soil they farmed, in the mountains they called home. In the 3rd episode of this series, we will uncover the glittering wealth of the Helvetii. They were not just warriors and farmers. They were master goldsmiths, artists in metal whose treasures have been found buried in Swiss soil, hidden for 2,000 years. Where did this gold come from? Who buried it and why? From the mysterious golden torques of Erstfeld, to the warrior burials of Münzingen, to the coin hoards hidden across the Swiss plateau. What do these treasures tell us about the people who made them? And what secrets do they still hold? They were not just objects of beauty. They were symbols of power, offerings to the gods, currency of a world that Rome would soon conquer. This history is based on archaeological discoveries from across Switzerland, including the famous Erstfeld hoard, the Münzingen burials, and numerous coin finds documented by the Swiss National Museum and Cantonal Archaeological Services. The story of the Helvetii continues.